My name is Jaap Hanekamp from the Netherlands, Roosevelt Academy, and this is...
My name is Aalt Bast. I'm a professor in toxicology of the Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And now I'm talking anyhow. I can ask Jaap a question because Jaap, there are a lot of intoxications with rulers in the past and nowadays, isn't it?
Well, the funny thing is, if you look back in history, you see that kings, pharaohs actually protected themselves from intoxication by having actually pretasters in their entourage to protect them against intoxication through food. So these pretasters first tasted the food. If they didn't die or get sick, the food was handed over to the king. And in a sense, we do that nowadays as well. We have toxicologists sort of protecting the general public against all kinds of insults from food and consumer products. So in a sense, there's a continuous line between the old days and now. But Aalt, you're a toxicologist. What do you do in everyday life with respect to food and health?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the consumers do it by themselves already. Because they select, for example, organic farming, and the consumer then thinks because there are no residues of herbicides or pesticides on my food, so that type of food is then safe for me. And if that is not enough, he thinks, well, if I buy something, I take food with the prefix bio in it. So he goes for bio oil or bio soap or bioflavonoids or even bio vitamin C. And the nicest thing I recently discovered, there is also biochromium.
Biochromium?
I don't know what is bio in chromium because chromium is a chemical element.
Absolutely.
But absolutely, yes. Chemochromium will not sell. It sounds better, it will not sell.
No.
So you see that the consumer does a lot of things to ensure safety, putative safety in his food. So that makes it difficult for the consumer. The consumer has difficulties in accepting unsafe food, don't you think so?
Yes. I think that's the case. People are very afraid of getting ill from consuming products they can buy on the market. But we're both chemists, and if we look at food as a chemical mixture of all kinds of compounds, you see that food contains so much different chemicals which are actually quite toxic at very high levels, like coumarin in cinnamon, for instance, or benzopyrenes in barbecued meat. There's a plethora of compounds which toxicologists like yourself would regard as not really the kind of stuff you would like to be exposed to too much. So could you elaborate a bit on that, Aalt, with respect to these compounds in food and how food affects health?
Yeah, and what we see, for example, food can do a lot on our health. And you can even say that sometimes pharmacology can be also steered by means of food. There is a very famous book by Adrian Albert. It is called Pharmacology, the pharmacochemical basis of pharmacotherapy it is called. And then the main title is Selective Toxicity. So Adrian Albert regarded pharmacology as a form of selective toxicity. So all the toxic compounds that we give also in pharmacology are in fact toxic compounds. And those toxic compounds are beneficial to the human physiology, although these compounds should be selective. And you can even say that many of the side effects of drugs are the result of the aselectiveness of some compounds. At the moment it's not selective enough, compounds become toxic. So we can use toxic compounds, in fact, as long as they are beneficial. Could it also be with the compounds, for example, in food? That would be interesting. If you say food contains so many toxic compounds, then perhaps even we can use food as pharmacological compounds.
Well, the interesting thing is what we see nowadays in a lot of research is that a lot of compounds we might regard selectively as toxic actually have all kinds of effects with individually you might, as a toxicologist, might describe as toxic, but on the whole have a beneficial effect on the human physiology, which is interesting because sometimes, or actually at this particular stage in research, toxicology and beneficial effects sort of merge into a whole which we haven't seen before. The problem though is that these effects from food compounds are relatively small.
Yeah.
They're not big. They're not really, as the general pharmacologist would say, well, one cause and effect, a massive effect from one compound to one cause. You don't see that in food, and happily so, because it would be troublesome to really think about, should I eat 1 kiwi or 1/4 kiwi, because that might be toxic. Fortunately, that's not the case. Al, do you have some examples of compounds which have these small effects on health which you might regard as toxic, which nevertheless, on the whole, actually brings benefit to humans?
Yeah, we recently had published a study in PLOS ONE in December last year,
Yeah?
and it was a compound. It was compounds that we used were grapeseed extracts, and we were interested in looking to the effect of grapeseed extracts on vascular health. And these grapeseed extracts have an anti-inflammatory action, and there are many things that happen at the same time. So you see redox modulation, you see the lipid profile changing a little bit, you see, because of redox modulation, some anti-inflammatory action, and we integrated all these phenomena in one parameter, and we call that the vascular health index.
Yes.
And we see that the subtle effects are not easily recognized because of all these various physiological systems which are changed, too small.
Yeah.
But when you integrate it in one index, the vascular health index, you see an effect of these grapeseed extracts. And I think that is the way we should handle food-derived compounds or dietary compounds, because then you take into account the subtle effect of all these compounds. And that is different than we do nowadays, don't you think so? We should do it differently.
So what you're saying is your field, toxicology field, pharmacology field, should actually move away from this one cause and effect, one compound approach to sort of a multi approach of small effects, which might be regarded singularly as toxic, which nevertheless as a whole actually instills benefit to human health.
But the problem is then, of course, the dose-response relationship is not linear anymore.
No.
And that is a problem, of course. It is feedback mechanisms occur, the effects are subtle, so you have no linear dose-response relationship
So
anymore.
you're looking for a more subtle dose response, which on the low side of the dosage is actually beneficial. On the high side, it would be detrimental to health. I think that might be the way forward with respect to food.
It almost goes back to the pharaohs, don't you think so? Because the
Yeah.
pharaohs also thought food as the bearer of divinity.
Yes.
It was something very, very special. And you were a high priest. If you could give the food to the pharaoh, you were a high priest. The pre-tasters, the toxicologists hired by the pharaohs were toxicologists. They were high priests of high social standing. And I like that as a toxicologist.
I can imagine that you
a high
like the
social
fact
standing.
that you have a profession of high social standing.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
okay, thanks very much.
Okay.